I'm sympathetic to the latter view. I do think things are going to get worse before they get better. In spite of signs to the contrary, secularism marches on, and it will continue to apply pressure on churches and ordinary Christians, both in resisting their beliefs and undermining their place in the public sphere. There's some wisdom in saying, "Dear Christian, brace yourself." But it's also true that this has always been the posture of Christians in the broader world. Christians have always served a different king and a different kingdom, and every generation faces the temptation to compromise, whether it concerns sexual ethics, racism, and human dignity, or the ever-present lure of power and money. And of course, compromise is never confined to one single issue. Today, we're immersed in a secular age, and we're profoundly shaped by its values. Its consumerism, its addictive nature, its pleasure and distraction seeking. A way forward in such a world will be countercultural in a host of ways. Searching for a role model. Many who have examined our current cultural situation have looked to the prophet Daniel as a role model. Daniel found himself living in pagan Babylon and pressured on all sides to compromise. But he endured that pressure and lived to tell the tale, unstained by the culture around him. He bore witness to God's faithfulness, and he won a certain respectability and plausibility for Jews in the process. But there's a problem with looking to Daniel. Most of us aren't a Daniel. In fact, we are far from it. As much as we recognize that our culture is in decline, we also kind of like it. Christians, in general, consume as much mass media and are as addicted to pornography, as likely to divorce, as consumeristic, and as obsessed with social media as the rest of our world. Again, we're immersed in a secular age, and it's had a profound effect on us. Daniel's faith was ironclad. He never let the pressure of exile shake his faith. He didn't adopt the dominant culture's way of life. I wish that were me, but it's not. I'm not a Daniel. I, like many of us, I suspect, am more troubled than Daniel, less steely. Like the old hymn says, I am prone to wander, prone to moments of gray doubt that leave me wondering how certain I am about the things I think I believe and value most. Daniel, on the other hand, was rooted in a countercultural way of life. Most scholars think he was taken into exile when he was about 15, which means he had spent most of his formative years in a Jewish world, immersed in the rhythms of the Jewish religion. He had a frame of reference for resistance in Babylon, clinging to his heritage and upbringing in the midst of a hostile world. And while he's a great model of faithfulness, I'm not sure he's the best reference point for most of us. With that in mind, let me suggest an alternative to the Daniel model. Someone born into exile, disconnected from a heritage of faith, out of touch with the practices that marked her people as distinct from the surrounding world. One who nonetheless found a way back to her identity as one of God's people, and one who might illustrate a path forward for the rest of us. I am talking about Esther, but not the Esther you may think you know. I'm talking about the real Esther, the biblical and historical Esther, whose life was a whirlwind of spiritual compromise and spiritual awakening, and whose story is full of power, sex, and violence. This is the Esther whose great moment is marked not by a show of force, but by vulnerability. The climax of her story comes when, after weakening her body with 3 days and nights of fasting, she walks a path that would most likely end in her death, in hopes of saving God's people. Esther's story reveals a way forward in a culture where people of faith find themselves at the margin of society.